I wrote the Curtis's Corner for the bulletin this morning about accountability, and I made the statement that at one point in my life, for a long time in my life, I tried to stay away from accountability. I didn't want people guiding me, telling me what to do, and I've done a complete flip after studying the Bible, and now I make sure I'm never without accountability. And I encourage you to think about doing the same thing, where you're never at a point where there's not somebody who can tell you, no, you're wrong, and you shouldn't do this. That is a valuable asset to have in your life at all times. Somebody that you will listen to, somebody that will tell you the truth. And so I want to talk about accountability tonight. We're going to be in Nehemiah 5, and the outline is in your bulletin. A lot of sermons are preached on accountability or church discipline, whatever you want to call it, come out of Joshua 7. Joshua 7 is where they went to beat Jericho, and right after that they went to defeat Ai, and Ai defeated them. They said, well, what happened? Well, we found out Achan took the devoted things. And so they had to have an assembly, and they drew lots, and they finally found out it was Achan, and Achan fessed up, yeah, I took the devoted things. And they had to deal with the sin in the camp. That's a very popular passage. Or probably the most popular one is Matthew 18, where that's the one that says, if your brother sins against you, go to him just between the two of you. If he listens, you've won your brother over. If not, take 2 or 3 others. And that's a great passage talking about how to set up accountability in the church or discipline. But Nehemiah 5, you don't ever hear anything about that, and yet there's some things that you're going to see in this passage that I think are invaluable, and things that Joshua 7 and Matthew 18 don't really deal with, and just ways to handle conflict and how to hold ourselves and each other accountable. So that's where we're going tonight. And so my first point is that if you are going to help somebody stay accountable, the first thing you do is listen. You've got to listen to the people. Maybe you think that just goes without saying, but it's a step we often skip. You need to listen. So that Nehemiah was able to repeat back the words of the people he was listening to. Read with me, if you would, in Nehemiah chapter 5 and verse 1. It says, "Now there was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, 'We, our sons, and our daughters are many. Therefore let us get grain that we may eat and live.' There were others who said, 'We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, our houses, that we might get grain because of the famine.' Also there were those who said, 'We have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyard. Now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, our children, like their children, yet behold, we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters are forced into bondage already, and we are helpless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others.'" We find out in the first verse that Nehemiah has listened to the people and found out what they said, but he also knows what their wives said. How does he know that? Because he asked them. He said, "Okay, I heard what you say. Now I'd like to hear what your wife thinks about this." All right? He listened to the people. He repeats back what they said here. He listened to the others in verse 2. He listened to others in verse 3. There were also those in verse 4. Each one, he's able to repeat back what is being said. If you want to know if somebody is listening to you, stop and say, "Could you please repeat back what I said?" Husbands, be ready for that, because the wives just heard that, all right? And they're going to use it. I'll guarantee you, they're going to use that. But wives, that's a two-way road. All right, so just saying, that's fair game. If you want to see if your kids are listening or not, just stop and say, "Okay, could you repeat back what I just told you to do. I don't know if kids can get away with that with parents or not, but that may be a little different story. But that's just a good way to find out if somebody is hearing you or not. There was one of my favorite professors in college was Dr. Marvin Moats, and he was a psychology professor, and so they asked him if he would be the official for a debate. And so he said, okay, I get to pick the rules? He said, you're the official, you pick the rules. Okay, here's my rules. Party A will speak, Party B will do nothing but listen the whole time, will not say anything. As soon as Party A is done speaking, Party B will repeat back what Party A said to Party A's satisfaction. Then Party A will shut up. Party B will talk uninterrupted, and as soon as Party B is done speaking, Party A will repeat back. It was a very long debate, as you might imagine, but there wasn't a lot of arguing that went on. That was a good rule. Just say, okay, let's make sure we're hearing each other. And that's where a lot of error occurs, is we really don't listen. Listen is a very important skill. And so if you're going to help somebody to stay accountable, and as you're seeing here, there's a problem in Israel. There was an exacting of usury. I'll get into that. I'll show you what that is. But this was causing great problems. So, as I mentioned, number 2, he listened to all of them. He heard what they were saying, and he listened to all of them. So before you do anything, you need to listen. Second thing, B, make certain you address the problem honestly. We're going to talk about the problem honestly, and that's what he does, starting in verse 6. Then I was very angry when I heard their outcry in these words, and I consulted with myself and contended with the nobles and the rulers and said to them, you are exacting usury, each from his brother. Therefore, I held a great assembly against them. I said to them, we, according to our ability, have redeemed our Jewish brothers who were sold to the nations. Now, would you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us? Then they were silent and could not find a word to say. And again, I said, the thing which you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the nations of our enemies? And likewise, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. But please let us leave off this usury. Please give back to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses. Also the 100th part of the money and of the grain, the new wine, and the oil that you are exacting from them. So the first thing we see in verse 6 is that he admits, says, I was angry when I heard about this. Interesting thing about anger. Anger is not always a sin. It's kind of like cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. There's good anger and there's bad anger. Most of it's bad, unfortunately. Most of the time, the way we go about anger is bad. But there is a good one. We know Jesus was angry, right? When he cleared the temple in John chapter 2. So obviously it's not always bad. But did he have a righteous reason to be angry? Yes, he did. Was he fuming the next day about it? No, he wasn't. And so and that's really the two things that seem to make the difference between righteous and unrighteous anger, is the motive for the anger. That can make it right or wrong. Is it just because your feelings got hurt? Is that why you're angry? Or is it because God's word is being violated? And second, how much control do you have over your anger? Is it something that you just lash out? Notice he didn't do that. In the next verse, he says, I consulted with myself. That's a good thing to do when you get angry. First, consult with yourself. Jesus had some things to say about this. He said in the Sermon on the Mount, you've heard that it was said that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder. And whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. Of course, one of the 10 Commandments, do not murder. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, and whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. Now answer me this, when do we say, you good for nothing, you fool? We say that when we're angry and when we immediately go to the person or react. That's reactionary. And Jesus is warning us, don't do that. What should you do when you're angry? Go consult with yourself. That's a good thing to do. Go think about it. Do I have a righteous reason to be angry? If you're parenting, and sometimes we discipline our children just because we're angry. Maybe they embarrassed us. Okay, that's not a good reason to discipline your children. Actually, anger is never a good reason to discipline your children. You should always discipline your children from love. That should be the motive for disciplining. I want what's best for my child. But if we're not careful, anger gets away from us. Ephesians chapter 4, 26 and 27 says, be angry and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not give the devil an opportunity. So James talks about don't be quick to anger. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And so it should be something that is under control. And when he says, don't let the sun go down on your anger, what does that mean? Good, I got another 30 minutes here. I can just be mad as I want. Is that what he means? No. He means you got to deal with it. You got to keep your emotions under control. Especially if you're dealing with a large group like Nehemiah was. You've got to keep your wits about you. And when you're angry, it says, don't give the devil an opportunity. I like the NIV. It says, don't give the devil a foothold. You know what a foothold is. If you're going to climb something, if I was going to climb a tree, I'd have to look for a good foothold. If I can find that foothold, I can climb. Right? If Satan can find a foothold, he'll climb all over your back. Don't give him that opportunity. When you are enthralled in anger or other deep emotions, you are in a state of vulnerability. And so be aware of that. You are vulnerable at that point, and that's why you need to learn to keep that under control. And if you can't keep it under control, step away from the situation before you say something you're really going to regret. I see some of you nodding your heads. Okay, you understand this is good advice, isn't it, from the Word of God? So, and it's something we all struggle with. Here's another important one. Ponder the facts before you point the finger. Going back again to verse 7, where he says, I consulted with myself, and then I contended with the nobles, the rulers, and said to them, you're exacting usury. So ponder the facts before you point the finger. Just don't be in such a hurry to point out, oh, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. Make sure you know, because you're going to embarrass yourself if you jump in there and you find out, I didn't do that. I got accused of saying something in a class one time that supposedly caused a member to leave the church. And the word got around the congregation, and they said, yeah, Curtis did this, and they didn't come to me, of course. They went to everybody else and told them, he said this and he did this. And finally, a brother came to me and says, I know you did this. I said, well, there's two things you ought to know about that. First of all, I was not the one who even said that. Second of all, I wasn't in the class. I wasn't even there, all right? And yet, I was accused of that. Ponder the facts meaning truth. Ponder the facts before you point the finger. Always a good thing to do. Deal with the problem in a timely manner. Show how the sin hurts our God. Verse 9, he mentions that. He says, what we're doing is hurting our God. Should you not walk in fear of our God? But also show the harm it causes the assembly. I wondered for a while when I first studied this passage, why at the end of verse 7, why the great assembly? If you're just going to deal with the nobles and the officials, why call the Great Assembly? I believe the reason is so that they could look in the eyes the people who were being hurt by their usury. This is not a victimless crime. Here's people right here, and what you're doing is harming these people. I believe that was why Nehemiah did the assembly. They were exacting usury. And so here's the next point. If it's a sin, call it a sin. You are exacting usury. This was a sin. Here it is. It's Exodus chapter 22, verse 25 through 26. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you're not to act as a creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you are to return it to him before the sun sets. So what usury is charging interest, taking advantage of people. That's when it's wrong. It was wrong for an Israelite to charge a fellow Israelite interest. They actually could charge foreigners interest. And Jews to this day have that reputation, don't they? They are money makers. You ever heard the expression, he Jewed me down? Right? That's kind of the reputation that they have. But they were taking advantage of each other, and that's what had to stop. It was causing problems. C, make certain you're not part of the problem. You're trying to deal with this issue. Make sure you're not contributing to the problem. Number one, Nehemiah was lending to the people, but he was not charging interest. Read verse 10 with me again. And likewise, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Please let us leave off this usury. He says, yeah, I'm lending them money, but I'm not charging interest. That's the difference. It wasn't a sin to lend. In fact, that was a blessing to people to do that. But he says, well, we're not charging any interest. And so you have to, because he could just hear them coming back and say, well, you're lending people too, you know. Why are you getting on us for? He says, yeah, but I'm not charging interest. That's what you're doing. And so make sure you're not part of the problem. Let's read on in verse 14. Moreover, from that day on, that I was appointed to be the governor of the land of Judah in the 20th year to the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes. For 12 years, neither I nor my kinsmen have eaten the governor's food allowance. But the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people and took from them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants domineered the people. But I did not do so because of, what's this? Because of the fear of God. Verse 16, I also applied myself to the work on this wall. We did not buy any land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now that which was prepared each day was an ox and 6 choice sheep, also birds were prepared for me. And once in 10 days all sorts of wine were furnished in abundance. Yet for all this I did not demand the governor's food allowance, because the servitude was heavy on the people. Remember me, O my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. So he did not charge the people. In fact, he didn't even take what was the governor's due. He says, that was just too heavy for the people. I paid my own way, is what he was saying. For 12 years. That's pretty sacrificial on his part. He was trying to do what's right, and he's trying to show you've got to make sure if you're going to help other people out of their sin, you've got to get the log out of your own eye. That's what Jesus said, right? Get the log out of your own eye before you try to take the speck out of somebody else's eye. It's a sin. The usury was a sin. It had to stop. And as I said before, if it's a sin, call it a sin. We water down, we have, I'm not really being lazy. I'm just having a little discipline problem, right? You're being lazy, all right? Let's call it what it is. Or, well, we're really not gossiping. We're just updating each other on the latest news. You're gossiping, all right? Call it what it is. Okay, all right, and here's a modern one we're really dealing with. Homosexuality is a sin. We have all sorts of different names for that. In fact, it is not politically correct to even call somebody a homosexual anymore. It's a sin. It will always be a sin. The Bible's not going to change on that. We need to call sin what it is. Lying. Well, I didn't really lie. I stretched the truth a little bit. No, you lied, all right? If it's a sin, let's call it sin. Okay, number 3, under making certain you're not part of the problem, notice he acted out of reverence for God. I love that in verse 15. I didn't do what the others did. I acted out of reverence for God. Constantly checking your motive. Why am I doing this? Because I revere God. That's why I'm doing this. I'm not trying to harm anybody. I'm not trying to get back at anybody. I revere God. I want what's best for this person that I'm trying to help. I'm just trying to help them stay accountable before God. I'm watching myself, all right? But that needs to be the motive, reverence for God. And then number 4, if you are part of the problem, get the log out of your eye first. And Jesus does say first, right? When we go to correct each other, we are imperfect people correcting other imperfect people. We need to acknowledge that. But I shouldn't have a gaping problem that I'm not dealing with, and I'm going to get this nitpicky thing from this other person. That's what Jesus condemned. You're going to take a speck out of somebody else's eye, and you have a log in your eye. And tell me Jesus didn't have a sense of humor. Is that not a funny picture? I remember when I was in college, we were cutting up some wood for the preacher. I guess the preacher couldn't cut his own wood. So we're out there, we're chopping up wood and stuff, and Brother Mark Bro picks up a log and says, "Hey, Curtis, let me get that speck out of your eye." And it wasn't until he did that I actually visualized what Jesus was saying. That's funny, all right? That's funny. And you can't get close enough to the person to even get the speck out of your eye because your log is bumping into them, right? That's what Jesus is saying. You got to get that out of the way or you can't help somebody else. So we constantly need to make sure we're holding ourselves accountable if we're going to help somebody else to be accountable. Man, this is good stuff. Isn't this good? Somebody ought to preach this. This is great stuff. Make certain there is accountability. Let me back up to verse 10 again. 10 through 13. And likewise I, my brothers, my servants, are lending them money and grain. Please let us leave off this usury. Please give back to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses. Also the 100th part of the money, of the grain, of the new wine, and the oil that you are exacting from them. And then they said, we will give it back and will require nothing from them. We will do exactly as you say. So I called the priest, took an oath from them that they would do according to this promise. I also shook out the front of my garment and said, thus may God shake out every man from his house and from his possessions who does not fulfill this promise. Even thus may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, Amen. And they praised the Lord. Then the people did according to this promise. Man, look at the way he handles this situation. He goes to them and he says, this is the problem. And I have here, be specific about what needs to change. It's okay to lend, don't charge the interest. Very specific. Don't do that part anymore. You need to be very specific about that. Be specific about when it needs to change. In this case, he said it needs to stop now. Now let me say, sometimes it doesn't have to be a right-away thing. And you need to acknowledge that. Say, here's what's going on. I realize it's going to take a while to make this right. And so let's just set a time. Let's meet back in a few days or in a week. And let's talk about, have we corrected the issue? It doesn't always have to be right away, but many times it does. Many times it's like, this needs to stop right now, especially if it's sin, obviously. Then that needs to be dealt with. But sometimes we're not talking about sin. Sometimes we're just talking about something that we could do better as a church, and we're trying to hold each other accountable about that. We see something that's hindering the church, and we need to talk about those things. Here's another point. Get the leaders involved in the accountability. So he confronts them about their sin, and what was the reaction? We're wrong. We're going to repent. He says, good. Okay, let me call the priest in, and we're going to take a vow. Remember, the whole assembly is there. They're taking a vow in front of the whole assembly. Why did he take that extra step? For accountability. More accountability. In front of the whole assembly, they spoke a vow before the priest. We're going to do this. We're going to give back everything right now, and we're not going to charge any more interest. All right? Maybe they went against their word, but it says they didn't. But there's just setting up that extra accountability doesn't hurt. We should do the right thing because God is watching us, right? But it doesn't hurt to have a little extra accountability. When I have something I'm trying to deal with in my life, I'm trying to do the right thing because I want God to be pleased with me. But I may go to a brother and say, brother, I'm struggling with this. I want you to ask me next week how I'm doing on it. And just setting up that little bit of extra, and just me knowing this brother over here is going to ask me, that little extra motivation helps me to deal with my sin. That's why we have the church. That's the advantage of having each other. We're trying to get closer to God together. When you don't have that, when you put yourself in a position where you have no accountability, you weaken your relationship with God, as well as your relationship with the church. So don't avoid this stuff. Move towards it. Move towards accountability. You will be grateful to God that you did. Explain the consequences of not repenting. He's very clear in verse 13. He shakes out the folds of his robe. He says, God's going to shake out from you. If you don't do what you just vowed that you were going to do, there's going to be some consequences. So he takes those extra steps. A lot of us would have quit when they said, okay, we're going to give it back. So, okay, great, we're done. Thanks for coming, He didn't do that. He went the extra step. Okay, let's take a vow. Everybody sees that. Everybody's watched. They just made that vow. Yeah, okay, now here's my warning. If you don't fulfill this vow, you're going to be shaken out. All right? Takes that extra step to make sure there is accountability. Very valuable, very valuable. So, all right, that is chapter 5 of Nehemiah. I'm glad that you came here. I hope that these things are helpful in your life. The criticism I get most about my preaching is it's really not preaching, it's more teaching. I'm okay with that, all right? I'm fine with that. If I taught you something valuable tonight, I am grateful for that. I'll preach another time, I promise, okay? But tonight was more information. I passed out some information that I hope was helpful to you. We are going to sing a song of invitation. Have you been to Jesus for his cleansing blood? If not, this would be a good night to do that. Please come as we stand and sing. Hello, I'm Curtis Hartshorn. Glad that you just watched that message. That was filmed right here at the Lake Road Church of Christ. As you can see, we're at 2080 North Main. The address is also there on your screen. It's great watching online, but we would love it even more if you would come and visit with us. So maybe this next Sunday you could come join us. You also, if you want to, there's a way to donate. We have a QR code now that you can scan. It takes you to a way to donate online, or you can send a check or money to our address. We're not soliciting funds. We are a small congregation, and every little bit helps. But the most important thing is that you're getting God's word. And so continue to watch, but if you can at all possible, come see us sometime. Love to have you. Again, I'm Curtis Hartshorn on behalf of the elders here and the Lake Road Church of Christ. God bless.